The following is a presentation prepared for the 12th Annual Water Conference being held in October of 2017 in Sofia, Bulgaria.
This is narrated by myself, Mark Burr, founder of Primary Water Technologies. I would first like to apologize for not being able to attend this year as a result of a busy fourth quarter, but I look forward to attending next year if I am invited back. Since the concept of primary water is new to many, it was agreed with Mr. Germanov that we would provide an introduction to this disruptive paradigm, reviewing its history and its broad scientific basis. So we like to go back in history to the ancients, some 2,500 years ago in Greece, where Thales realized that any substance could be classified as solid, liquid, or gas. In addition, he went further. Water can exist in each of these forms. So might it be the case that all matter is nothing more than water? Now that might seem to be a bit of an outlandish statement in many audiences, but to the water conference, I believe you are beginning to grasp the reach and importance of this molecule. And I believe by the end of this presentation, you might become even more convinced how water is central to our planet, our solar system, and the universe itself. So let's dive right into it. The modern history of primary water is over a century old, with programmatic rollouts having been undertaken in California in the 1950s and later on the East Coast. Australia also has earth-generated primary water practitioners going back into the 19th century, and certainly over the last 25 plus years have drilled many of these boreholes across the island continent. We believe the Germanic peoples have understood these concepts for centuries, and even today there are practitioners from Austria, Switzerland, Germany who have undertaken projects in Iran, India, even the Horn of Africa. So the projects that have been documented are worldwide on every continent, with thousands of successful water wells having been drilled. We point to the seminal work of Adolf Erik Nordenskiöld of Sweden. The Nordenskiölds were, of course, a famous family, well known. His father was the chief geologist of Finland, member of the Russian Academy in the 19th century. They were explorers of the poles and worldwide. And Nordenskiöld, working very closely with the Nobels, for example, was heavily involved in the mining industry. And once he was deep in a mine at a high elevation, well above the water table, and observed the creation of water. He wasn't sure at first what it was, but he identified something blue-green, and of course, it being a mine, was concerned that it might cause a flame or a fire. He realized that it was water emerging from a crystalline rock. He took samples, returned to his laboratory, and discovered that this was high-quality potable water in an area where he was nearly surrounded by salt water. So he discussed this with his father and others and said there must be another geophysical force at work that is creating water. He then undertook to drill dozens of boreholes around Scandinavia, Sweden, rocky promontories, even rocky islands. And each and every time, he considered 32 out of 33 drilling project success, he encountered water near surface that was potable. Ultimately, he wrote a paper on his work and was nominated for the first Nobel Prize in Physics. Unfortunately, he passed away early in 1901 before the first prizes were awarded. The title of that study, translated, is About Drilling for Water in Primary Rocks. On the right is a quotation in which he states that at a constant depth of a little over 30 meters under the surface of the earth, a water-bearing horizontal fissure is encountered. The theories about folding and the displacement of the primary rock surface layers by temperature variation have been clearly corroborated hereby. Nordenskiöld goes on to state that this water came free of bacteria that exists in the Earth's surface, organic detritus, decay, and other things injurious to health, and for our purposes, it is unexcelled in hygienic respects. So Nordenskiöld understood that primary water really is an applied science. All science should be applied, but we often are not able to discern theory from actual nature's laws if we don't go and prove them in the field. He did so over and over, and as a result, solved some very difficult problems incurred especially by those who manned lighthouses, critical in that day, and therefore the provisioning of which was quite expensive, especially the water. Subsequent to and independent of Nordenskiöld, a Bavarian-born mining engineer, Stefan Riess, immigrated to the U.S. and worked for the Hoover family's mining operations throughout the U.S. Southwest. Similar to Nordenskiöld, once when deep in a mine, he discovered water being squeezed out of crystalline rock. The water was of high quality, potable, and of no relation to rainwater or any groundwater aquifers in the area. So he decided to purposefully locate and drill his first primary water well in 1934 in El Dorado Canyon, south of Las Vegas, Nevada, high above the Colorado River. The water struck a vein which came out under tremendous pressure and was free-flowing, significant enough to create a large lagoon until it was put under control. That water well would remain of high productivity and of high quality until the area was abandoned most recently in the 1970s. Riess would go on to spend 50 years developing this concept of earth-generated water, new water, what ultimately he called primary water, emerging from the primary rocks, and documented over 700 primary water well projects on multiple continents. Here, Riess provides the perfect definition of primary water. At no time is water static. It is constantly changing form. It is either a liquid or gas, or it is bound up in crystalline form in rocks and minerals. The cycle of gas to liquid to crystal is repeated over and over. Oxygen and hydrogen combine under the electromechanical forces of the earth to form liquid water. Not only is water being constantly formed within the earth, but also rocks, minerals, and oil. What I seek is water in its liquid state. To the left is a photo of one of the wells he drilled in Simi Valley, north of Los Angeles, up in the mountains, where it had not been developed up until then because all of the water was seen to have been highly saline, sulfuric, and no potable, usable water to be found. This particular well produced 1,900 gallons a minute. That would be upwards of 7,000 to 8,000 liters per minute. After nearly 2 decades of successful projects in the U.S. Southwest, Mexico, and even Brazil, the local media started to take an interest, especially in the midst of one of California's extended droughts. As you could see from the 1953 headline, "Revolution in Water Seeking. If results mean anything to scientists, Riess's theories of water's origin bear investigation." 2 years later, the property that Riess developed in Simi Valley would sell to a well-known Texas oilman, Clint Murchison, for $1 million. It includes the establishment of a foundation to be known as Riess Search, to study the Riess method of locating water, pursue its application to arid lands generally, encourage global-scale reforestation, and train young geologists and engineers. Unfortunately, the vicious politics of water in California would ensure that that vision would not be realized. Riess's work also came to the attention of a Los Angeles developer named Nathan Mendelsohn, who saw in the Mojave Desert an ability to create a new Los Angeles, a new planned city, but all that was lacking was water. Riess had already drilled a number of very successful, highly productive wells in that area. As you can see, California City today and then sits in the middle, in the heart of the extensive Mojave Desert, not far from Death Valley itself. Within a few years, they had drilled wells and they had successfully begun the development of what they believed to be would be the new Los Angeles of California. This photo is important because you can see that they do not and did not go to the traditional areas of where one would seek water, sedimentary areas, valleys, depressions, where water is known, rainwater is known to collect into aquifers. Instead, they went to what clearly is what we would generally call a volcanic plug, a diatreme. And there they sunk wells that became the heart of that city's Central Park. Over half a century later, these wells continue to produce without correlation to rainfall in the middle of a desert and after multiple extended droughts in Southern California. Today, almost all of those wells have been refurbished and produce some 75% of the domestic water for California City. As a result of the success in California City, Mendelsohn brought Riess to Israel, where the young government was seeking water solutions for the new city of Eilat on the Red Sea's Gulf of Aqaba. Less than a year later, the Jerusalem Post announced that the Riess-located well was sufficient to supply a city of more than 100,000 people, including industry and outlying villages. This was well covered in the press of the day, and Egypt's President Nasser brought Riess to Egypt, where south of Cairo he also drilled wells successfully well above the Nile River, where no one expected potable water to be found. Moved on to the Sudan, and then ultimately was invited by then Prince Faisal, later King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, where he drilled wells literally within sight of the salty Gulf in what is the area of Ras Tanura today. Here is a copy of the Jerusalem Post article of 1959 announcing U.S. mining engineer performs miracle in Negev. Water from Arava rock. Every amateur geologist and water expert in Israel knows that one drills for water where rain has seeped through porous limestone or through alluvial soils, but never in impermeable granite. The same self-evident phenomenon is acknowledged the world over. Water in deserts. There is one man, though, who thought otherwise. Stephen Riess, an American mining engineer, oil, and water prospector. During this time, the academic and scientific community of Southern California took notice of Riess's many successful projects. Dr. Michael Salzman ultimately studied the issue for a number of years as the drought worsened and need for solutions were sought. Ultimately, he published in 1960 the book that we consider to be the textbook of primary water, New Water for a Thirsty World. Unfortunately, within months, nearly every copy was bought up and destroyed. Fortunately, it is available digitally online thanks to the Hathi Trust with the link there that you see in the bottom left. Although Salzman's book was written for the layman, it went into considerable depth on the status of hydrology, geology, geochemistry, mineralogy, crystallography, and even the emerging isotope geology of the day. Here is a selection from the book that focuses in on a critical aspect to understand how this water is being created near surface, in the crust, almost everywhere around the world. The role of piezoelectricity is fundamental to this understanding. The relationship of elastic quantities to electrical quantities is apparently not described in structural geology books. Further down, many ruptures now occupied by dikes or veins are the concern of the petrologist or the economic geologist, whereas in the origin of the rupture itself remains the concern of the structural geologist. Petroleum geologists have found that the extensive deposition of ore minerals along faults usually denotes poor prospects for oil production. These very same occurrences, however, may be favorable for primary water production. Indeed, they were spectacularly favorable, as Riess continued to demonstrate over and over by targeting the faults and fissures and fracture zones of the earth. They then narrowed in on ferromagnetism and spontaneous polarization as the causes that may begin a process of electricity within the earth. Electric current passing through solutions decomposes them and results in the liberation of gases or metals and is known as electrolysis. If hydrogen and oxygen are present at certain specific temperatures or in the presence of a catalyst, they unite to form water. They were close. They naturally looked at magma and radioactive rocks, given the geological paradigm of the day as to the source of our planet's heat. What they overlooked was, in fact, the most abundant rock mineral of our continents, and that, of course, is quartz. The quartz that forms the basis of our crystalline rocks, and right down to the sand of our beaches. And, of course, quartz has that unique property of piezoelectricity. So at this point, many of you may be wondering how it's possible that such a concept could not have risen and been promoted and now known throughout the world. Unfortunately, we have the very vicious water politics of California to blame. The backdrop being yet another large water scheme to dam a river in the north, the Feather River, and build aqueducts to the south, the very thirsty south of Los Angeles, encouraged by the Central Valley farmers who would receive vastly subsidized water at the expense of the LA taxpayer. Ultimately, folks like Riess and these well drillers were seen as a liability and ultimately pushed out of the way so they could pass their multi-billion-dollar bonds that today still have not been paid off and are going through another round of massive public works projects in the midst of thousands of primary water wells that continue to produce primarily for private interests throughout California. United States Senate hearings were actually held for a period of 2 years, including in California, where one of the consulting geologists, Ralph Arnold, extremely well known and highly regarded for having discovered many of the oil fields of California, as well as credited with the discovery of the oil fields in Maracaibo area of Venezuela. And when asked about why isn't this more widely known, this concept of primary water, he said that basically because the geologists, hydrologists, and other scientists simply did not know how to discover the water, it was ignored. So to recap, the water well, primary water well inventory encompasses those drilled by Nordenskiöld over a century ago, the hundreds and hundreds developed and documented by Steve Riess over a period of 50 years, The Riess Institute, which took up his work and moved mostly to New England, where a drilling field was established north of Boston by the daughter of General George Patton and his grandson-in-law, who drilled some of the deepest 4-inch boreholes in the world to test these concepts of fractures and fissures and their relationship to deep groundwater. One of the disciples of Steve Riess, a gentleman named Paul Power, who had immigrated to the United States as a refugee in 1956 from Hungary, studied petroleum geology there in California, ultimately studied for a better part of a decade under Steve Riess, learning the primary water method, and ultimately, up to the present day, over 50 years, developed projects throughout the Southwest and around the world, including launching a project for Global Resource Alliance in the Masai Mara region of Tanzania, a very dry, arid area within the Rift Valley, where no one believed there were any aquifers and most groundwater was contaminated. They now have over 120 wells, average depth of 60 meters, producing bacteria-free water for those most in need. They've also drilled some successful projects for the Rodi International in Kenya. In fact, a third one just weeks ago in the same area outside of Machakos, producing some 300 gallons per minute without pump testing, I should say. The work of Paul Power with Global Resource Alliance is an excellent example of a programmatic rollout of the primary water paradigm. They created a 10-minute video some years back that you can see the link to below. Although in the heart of the Rift Valley of Africa, regions typically considered to be volcanic and thus highly forbidding in which to drill for and locate potable water. In fact, those zones are highly attractive to the primary water paradigm. Again, over 120 wells have now been drilled in the Mara region, average depth somewhere 50 to 60 meters. They come up with a high static level, all bacteria-free in a region where no such wells can be drunk directly from the tap. The members of the Water Conference are certainly aware of overspecialization, groupthink, and outright dogma that has crept into modern science, but that doesn't restrain all of us. Obviously, in our case, advances in remote sensing have refocused astrophysicists and planetary scientists together with geochemists and geophysicists and biochemists to re-examine our Earth. And in this vein, we actually propose a new discipline, that of geohydrology, the study of Earth-generated water using physics, chemistry, biology, mineralogy, crystallography, in addition to geology, petrology, and hydrology. Although the term geohydrology can be found, in most cases it's just simply hydrogeology written another way, or it is emerging in certain universities as a sub-discipline of geophysics, which is actually probably the best place for it to start now, since hydrology itself has become basically a sub-discipline of civil engineering, more concerned with hydraulics and long-distance plumbing, as we call it. I have an extensive review of the literature developed over the last 15 years, but I don't think there's time to present it today. But let's conclude with this recent announcement as a result of quite a couple of decades of work, primarily by seismologists, who are now quite ready to proclaim that though not in the familiar liquid form, the ingredients for water are bound up in rock deep in the Earth's mantle. The discovery may represent the planet's largest water reservoir. This was confirmed this year by a multinational team in which they develop in laboratories the conditions under which water can be created in the mantle and, according to us, we know, in the crust itself. We show it's possible to have water forming in Earth's natural environment rather than being of extraterrestrial origin. It backs up previous work by Japanese researchers who performed and reported the reaction itself in 2014. So we seek to replace the traditional hydrologic cycle that we are taught since grade school, primarily based on the recycling of rainwater, with the primary hydrologic cycle driven by Earth's energy that creates liquid water in abundance near surface in the crust, as well as extensive amounts of water vapor through volcanic activity that is the true source of the water of our planet and of our atmospheric water cycle. I would like to leave you with some food for thought. Here is a depiction of the magma theory of the Earth. We believe it is a pseudo-theory, meaning unproven theory taught as fact,
which we believe will soon be replaced by the fully developed hydroplanet model, which posits that our planet has a solid ice inner core, a liquid water outer core, and a rock-water mantle of slab sheets and extensive water aquifers at every level. So maybe at next year's water conference, I can explain in more detail the 4 fundamental laws of the hydroplanet model. The law of primordial matter, that water is the primordial matter in the universe. The law of hydrogenesis, that all other matter originated from water. The law of hydroformation, that all natural crystalline minerals formed in water. The law of hydrobiogenesis, that all organisms are born of water. This ends our brief presentation on primary water, a bit of its history and scientific basis. At the Primary Water Technologies website, there is a much more extensive slideshow that I welcome you to review and send any questions about. And in the meantime, again, I thank you very much for this opportunity to present to the 2017 Water Conference.